Hello, and welcome to Language, Culture, and Dr. Lou. And today I would like to talk a little more Shakespeare. And specifically, I want to talk about words that Shakespeare did not invent. And so, why did this come up? I'm not, hating on Shakespeare. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. In fact, the last video I made before this was called Everyday Expressions from Shakespeare. So please do check that video out if you want to hear me giving credit to Shakespeare for things that he did invent for parts of the English language that we still use today that were coined by him. And tell you what, I'm going to put a link to that video in the description of this video right here in case you are interested in hearing it. So while I was looking into what words and phrases Shakespeare can be credited for, uh, I found that there's a lot of people giving credit to Shakespeare for words that he cannot have invented because they were being used before he wrote his plays. And so, therefore, he didn't invent them, he did not coin them or anything. And so, these words include the 11 here on screen: assassination, bedazzle, bold faced, deafening, eyeball, frugal, hurry, inaudible, premeditated, puke, and uncomfortable. And so in this video here, I'm going to tackle the first 5 words in alphabetical order from assassination through eyeball. And maybe, yeah, the other 6 words, maybe we can consider that a part 2 of this video series, but we'll hold on to that for another time because I don't want to make this video, an hour long. So let's dive into it. Assassination. So who claimed that Shakespeare coined the phrase, the word assassination? That would be Snapple, the iced tea company. And they have, you might know, on the inside of the cap of Snapple bottles, sometimes there's facts. They call it real facts. Um, and also, well, they keep them elsewhere too. But this so-called real fact, number 807 from Snapple, says that Shakespeare invented the word assassination and bump. Now, credit where credit is due. I have no reason to think that Shakespeare did not invent the word bump. So, okay, Snapple, that's an interesting fact. But the problem is, they're wrong about the word assassination. And by the way, the picture you're seeing here is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which pretty much sparked World War I. Anyway, and so that's the scene that you're seeing here. And it turns out that Shakespeare could not have been the one to invent the word assassination because um, we have an example of it used in 1572 uh, by Sir Thomas Smith in writing. And so bear in mind that Shakespeare's main plays that we know, most of his major works that we know of, these were published between 1589 and 1613. So 1589, when he was the year, well, he started as 24 and turned 25 that year until 1613, which was only 3 years before his death. Now, we're giving Shakespeare credit for inventing the word assassination if we listen to Snapple. But the thing is, Sir Thomas Smith in this letter to Dr. Wilson, you clearly used the word assassination in 1572, which, by the way, since Shakespeare was born in 1664, I mean 1564, 1572, when that word was being used, Shakespeare, that was the year that Shakespeare turned only 8 years old. So he was seven or eight when this word was being used by a different author. So therefore, it was not invented by Shakespeare. But I'm not saying he didn't use it because he did, but he was not the first. So there you go. So credit to Sir Thomas Smith for being the earliest usage of the word assassination that I could find anyway. And so, in addition to assassination, um, and in addition to Snapple, there are other people giving Shakespeare credit for inventing words that he could not have invented. And so, one of such words is bedazzle, the verb bedazzle, which means to thrill or excite someone. And of course, bedazzled we equate these days with, rhinestones all over something, jewels all over something, bedazzled. And so the claim is that Shakespeare used the word bedazzled first uh, in The Taming of the Shrew. That's from an article that came out only 10 years ago, well, 10, 11 years ago. Um, and while it's true that Shakespeare did use the word bedazzled in The Taming of the Shrew, absolutely, that was not the first instance where we can see the word bedazzled or the verb bedazzle in writing. And so someone used, I found an even earlier usage of the word bedazzling, right? That's still part of the verb bedazzle. And that was John Boswell in Works of Armory in, again, 1572. So we're talking when Shakespeare was only 7 or 8 years old. The verb bedazzle was already being used, and can see the evidence in the use of bedazzling in this little excerpt from Works of Armory. And so there you go. Um, excuse me. Sorry about that. And so, although Shakespeare did use the word bedazzled in Taming of the Shrew, that was not till quite a long while after John Boswell had used the word bedazzling. So, same verb, bedazzle, different form of the verb, and when Shakespeare was only like 7 or 8 years old. So, clearly, he cannot and must not have invented that word, right? And so, another word that Shakespeare is credited with inventing is bold-faced. And the hyphen, uh, I might be able to give Shakespeare credit for the hyphen itself in this word, but not the term itself, not coining bold-faced as a term. And so the claim specifically mentions the hyphen and the ed ending, saying that was coined by Shakespeare in Henry VI, Part 1. And no disrespect to William Shakespeare of the New York Times, because he does a lot of good writing, especially having to do with literature. But he's, in my opinion, incorrect about this because I found, again, another example of bold-faced being used earlier. And so again, we're going back to usage of this word in 1572. Again, Shakespeare was only 7 or 8 years old when this work came out, a treatise of treasons against Queen Elizabeth and the Crown of England, divided into two parts. Um, and so cannot have been Shakespeare who even influenced the writing of this work, since again he was just a little kid. And although the author here does not use the hyphen, clearly there's a character who says, I should make you blush, as bold faced as you be. Very clearly, that expression was already being used without the hyphen, but heck, hyphens come and go from words. It's like every generation redoes what they want to hyphen and what they don't. So uh, I would say that, yeah, Shakespeare, maybe indeed he was the first person to put a hyphen in it, but he did not coin that turn of speech, that word. That was somebody else when Shakespeare was just a little kid. Now, what else has he been given credit for where it might not be due? The word deafening. And of course, the claim is that the word deafening was coined by Shakespeare. And this is from a really good book, an interesting book, which is very much about literary history, about history and literature. And so I don't want to, trash the authors of that book or anything, but as far as deafening is concerned, not exactly. Shakespeare was not the first person to use deafening as a word either. Now, see, the reason they're giving him credit for the word deafening is that, well, the earliest version of the word deafening that we can see in Shakespeare's work is in Henry IV, Part 2. But the thing is, the original version of that was published in 1600, it used a different word. It used the word deafing. And it was not until 1623 when the first folio version of Henry IV, Part 2 was published. And that, by the way, 1623, that's about 7 years after Shakespeare died. So this was published posthumously for him, this edition anyway. That one used the word deafening. So we cannot give Shakespeare credit for using deafening way back in 1600, right? The first version we can see of him using this would be the one published right after his death, well, 7 years after his death in 1623. That had the word deafening. Before that, he was using deafing. And so I found an example using the word deafening from 1607, which would be a good 16 years before Henry IV, Part 2, the first folio version, ended up getting published in 1623. So I would give Gervase Markham credit for using the word deafening when in the English Arcadia, the author wrote, to her struggling, so she added such lamentable outcries, such piercing sorrows, and such deafening clamors. All of that was again 1607. So this was after Shakespeare had begin publishing his plays, but it was not before, but it was not after the version of Henry that the fourth part two that included that word. It was before, way back in 1607. So that, yeah, I would give the credit to Gervase Markham. Although I can't be positive there was not an even earlier version of this, right? Uh, but what I can be positive of is that Shakespeare was not the first person to use it. And so that to me is interesting too. And so one more word, eyeball, which of course compound word talking about the round bowl of your eyes, pretty much the whole round part of the eyes, your eyeball, right? And this owl here has nice big eyeballs. Owls are good for that. And so the claim by mental floss in 20 words we owe to William Shakespeare um, is not so correct when they say that Shakespeare's protagonist, Prosperio, can claim to be the first fictional character to ever use that word, right? Um, and not to trust mental floss. I read their stuff. They have interesting stuff about language. But this particular one, eyeball, that is not that's not properly credited to Shakespeare because he was not the first person to use it. And so here's the correction on that. There was William Patten, who wrote the calendar of Scripture in 1575. So this would be when Shakespeare was 10 or maybe turning 11 years old. And way back at this time, William Patten had a character say, "Purple, mine eyeball." So that would have to be an earlier fictional character than Prosperio um, to use eyeball in a sentence. So there you go. Shakespeare did not include the word eyeball before anybody else, since he was only 10 or 11, the first time that this one can be seen in writing. And Shakespeare wouldn't start publishing his works for another 14 years after that. So again, I'm not trying to tear down Shakespeare. I do very much respect him, and I'm impressed by how much influence he has had over the English language. Again, please check out my video, Everyday Expressions from Shakespeare, for plenty of examples of that. But I also, wanted to set the record straight about these particular words because while Shakespeare did use each and every one of them, he was not the first. So let's not claim he invented them. Anyway, so I wanted to say thank you for watching my video again. And I especially appreciate everybody who sticks around until the very end. And so thank you for doing that because now we have reached the end of the video. Please do give this one a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please do. It's free, it's easy, and it will make sure you will never miss another upload from my channel. And so I'm going to follow this video up with part 2, where I'm covering those 6 other words I haven't talked about yet in this one. And so until then, I will see you around next time. Bye bye.